Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. Here we are, the first week of a fresh and crispy new year, and we're probably all wondering what the future has in store for us. For me, it would seem the answer is more HeroQuest, because I have recently received my copy of Spirit Queen's Torment. Just look at that. Ooh, shiny. And, weirdly, shiny on the reverse and sides as well. Wasn't expecting that. So yes, I didn't order my copy of Spirit Queen's Torment and Prophecy of Telor through Hasbro Pulse, I just got them through Amazon, and as of yet only Spirit Queen's Torment has arrived. I'm sure by now most HeroQuest fans will have heard of these expansions, probably bought them, or at least watched some unboxing videos and reviews. But nevertheless, today I'm going to run through the components in this box and share my thoughts on everything, including some general, vague, hand-wavy, relatively spoiler-free opinions of the campaign. There will be a second video in the very near future for Zargon players only, where I will talk about the campaign in more detail. First, very briefly, just in case you are new to the game and don't know exactly what Spirit Queen's Torment is, it's a brand new quest pack. Only, not exactly brand new. It's actually a retail repack of a quest that was originally exclusive to the crowdfunding campaign that birthed Avalon Hill's new edition of HeroQuest on Hasbro Pulse's HasLab platform. The team have taken the quest, spruced it up a little bit, and packaged it with some previously exclusive alternative sculpts, a previously exclusive new hero, the Orc Bard, 6 translucent green dice that are exclusive to this pack, and 14 game cards. And, in an attempt to keep everybody happy, they made sure the contents of this box were ever so slightly different to what early adopters received from the crowdfunding campaign, by making all of the miniatures in a translucent plastic to make them look like creepy ghosties. They also, as you can see, gave the box a foil finish to make it extra sparkly and desirable for collectors. And by the way, this box is the same size as the one for Keller's Keep and Return of the Witchlord, and I would say you are looking at a comparable amount of content to those earlier expansions. But just look at this cover for a moment. It's a nice piece of art that works really well with the foil. You've got a post-Slimming World Ursula, and wrapped around her is Flotsam, or is that Jetsam? In the background we have wailing spirits, some of which are orcs. What could it all possibly mean? Well, it means trouble for the heroes, that's for sure, but more specifically, the story here is that in a recent attack by Zargon's forces, a sorcerer used a dread magic spell that created fire. This is, apparently, not supposed to be possible, although I'm a bit hazy on exactly why. I've read the explanation in the quest, but the dread magic deck is full of spells that use fire, ice and wind, so I don't really get it. Regardless, Mentor sends the heroes to meet with a character called Sylvana, who tells them that the dead are restless. She has had a vision in which her late apprentice Nelath was surrounded by motes of elemental magic. Sylvana charges the heroes with venturing to Wyvern Keep, where Nelath was laid to rest, to establish what is going on. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. Go to the place, find out what's going on, kill the bad guys, take their stuff. The usual. Oh, and for the record, while any kind of official timeline is largely meaningless for HeroQuest, this quest is supposed to sit in the series after the core game, Keller's Keep and Prophecy of Telor. There are a few standalone online quests slipped in between those full quest packs, but I've got a lot to cover here, so let's get on. The first thing to be aware of is that this campaign doesn't feature any new enemy types. You are going up against greenskins and the undead, just like in the core game. However, at certain points you will be facing ghostly versions of these enemies, and even though that doesn't happen all that much, that's why the miniatures have been cast in translucent plastic. I am not the biggest fan of translucent miniatures, but I understand the reasoning, and at least I am happy to have these alternative sculpts of the most commonly occurring enemies in the game. The set includes 2 orcs with gigantic hammers. These I really like. They could be my favourite orc sculpts. They look much bigger than the original orcs, so I am thinking you could probably paint them up and use them for orc bosses. Next we have 2 goblins. These have a sort of feral appearance. They are wearing animal skins and they have armed themselves with clawed gauntlets. Again, this makes them stand out compared to the original goblins, and I think they would work well for special characters like bosses, trackers or even shamans. Then we get to the really good stuff that I think makes this set much more appealing. You get 1 new Dread Warrior. He's got very dynamic posing, and I think this inclusion is fantastic because 1, the only other expansion with extra Dread Warriors is Prophecy of Telor, and you could never have too many burly knights to throw at those pesky heroes, and 2, all of the Dread Warriors in the core game have identical sculpts. This new version is very different and could easily be painted up to represent various bosses or even a special named character from a certain expansion that Avalon Hill didn't include a miniature for. This expansion also includes a Dread Sorcerer, and this is cool because it's the alternative female version of the one from the core game. There are numerous quests where the heroes meet a female sorcerer, and for those who missed the original HeroQuest crowdfunding campaign, this is the first time that they have had a suitable miniature for that purpose. Then there are extra undead miniatures. Again, this is a great addition to the game because despite the inclusion of undead miniatures in the core game and the Return of the Witchlord expansion, this is the first time that folk buying at retail have had variant sculpts to give the shambling horde some much needed variety. We have 2 mummies. These appear to be female and they aren't that nice. I prefer the walk like an Egyptian version, but even then I think this new edition of HeroQuest is yet to give us a truly fantastic mummy sculpt. Then we have 2 new zombies. These also appear to be female, although sometimes it's hard to tell with the translucent plastic. As with the mummies, I would say these new zombies aren't as good as the ones from the core set, but for me, nothing will ever compare to the zombie from the 1989 edition of HeroQuest anyway. The last undead minions we get are 2 skeletons. Rather than scythes, these have a sword and shield combo, and I like these a lot. They are good sculpts, and I think they would be really good for representing a fallen champion who has returned to life to cause trouble for the heroes. And we still aren't done because I have saved the best for last. This expansion includes 2 new abominations. Now I am on record as saying I am not a fan of the abominations. I may be slightly biased because I miss my femurs, but nevertheless I never thought much of the abominations. But these are a bit more like it. They are bigger than the originals, much more imposing, and their roaring expressions, spiky protrusions and tentacles make them feel much more alien and horrifying. They are entirely more monstrous and slightly less ridiculous than what came before. I'm very happy with those. However, you aren't just getting extra minions here. As I mentioned before, you are also getting another hero. This guy. So, I am also on record as saying I do not like the Orc Bard character at all. But I do think it's worth reiterating, more options for players is never really a bad thing. I may not like the Orc Bard, so what? Other people do, and they now have an extra character they can use should they wish to. And if I was playing HeroQuest and someone in my group said they would like to be the Bard, of course I wouldn't object. But it's not for me personally. It's not that I have a problem with a Bard character, but I really don't like this particular take on a Bard character. For a start, he's an orc. This won't bother some people, but I simply don't like having a heroic orc in my games of HeroQuest. I'm old school. I grew up in the 80s and 90s kicking down doors, stabbing up greenskins and taking their stuff. I don't want to team up with one now. I suppose I should point out here that the inclusion of the Orc Bard with the Spirit Queen's Torment expansion makes a lot of sense because this whole quest pack leans into the Orcs ain't all bad idea. I believe the designers said they wanted to make a quest specifically to show that not all orcs are evil creatures under Zargon's power. Some are nice, peaceful, happy, helpful things. So as you play you will find orcs who are friends with elves, orcs that will help you, and benevolent orcs that sacrifice themselves for the greater good. And I just don't like it. Orcs are evil and I will have no remorse in looting their corpses. I don't want to have to stay my hand for fear of slaying a loving family orc who is just 2 days from retirement. I do understand that giving nuance to the orcs can add a lot of depth and open up new avenues of storytelling. I appreciate it can add layers of subtle flavouring that could make the world more engaging. Why are so many orcs helping Zargon if they aren't all bad, for example? There is immense scope for delicate, thoughtful storytelling. I'm just not really convinced HeroQuest is the right place for it. Maybe it's because of HeroQuest's connection with my youth. When I play HeroQuest, yes, I'm having fun with a good game, but I'm also reconnecting with something I lost a long time ago, rediscovering that child who played this game on Christmas Day 1989. I am stealing a moment of time from myself, from when things were simpler and everything made sense. There is a joyful naivety baked into the soul of HeroQuest, and in a small way, this expansion chips away at that. But back to the point, I don't like the Bard. The fact he's an orc is part of it, but also he's such a dorky looking character. He's dressed like a pantomime pirate, complete with an anchor tattoo on his shoulder, and his facial expression as he belts out his song is ridiculous. HeroQuest is, of course, no stranger to things that are slightly ridiculous, but even the dapper young wizard from my 1989 edition, who I am rather fond of poking fun at, doesn't feel like he stepped out of an episode of Disenchantment like this orc does. Finally, I'm just not convinced he's interesting enough. His stats are Attack 2, Defend 2, Body 5, Mind 4, making him comparable with the Elf, who is identical except for having one more body point, and the Rogue, who is identical except for having one less attack dice. He starts the game with a rapier, which gives him a 2-dice attack that can be used diagonally, and he has an ability that says if he is wearing only non-metal armor and he doesn't have a shield, then he gets 1 extra defend dice, which means he can very quickly boost his defense in the early stages of the game. What really makes the Bard stand out is he has a set of 3 spells, and this is probably the biggest disappointment for me, as I don't think they feel different enough from other spells we have already seen. HeroQuest does have a limited design space in some regards when it comes to creating new characters. In attempting to maintain balance, it's often necessary to constrain abilities in a way that makes them feel quite similar to something we have already seen before, and I think that's happened here. The first spell is Healing Song. It affects the Bard and all heroes he can see, and they all regain 2 body points. This is a decent spell. It doesn't restore as many body points as Water of Healing or Heal Body, but it can affect more heroes at once. I don't like that it's limited to only what the Bard can see. He is supposed to be singing or playing a song, so it should be an area of effect that fills a room or corridor regardless of line of sight. This is actually a complaint I have about all of the Bard spells. They don't feel quite right. They target single characters or only models in line of sight. I really think the Bard's thing should be the ability to affect large groups, regardless of line of sight, but at the cost of the spells being essentially weaker or trickier to implement because they affect friend and foe alike. Also, a healing spell is just a bit, well, you know. Moving on, we have Lullaby. Affects one monster, they fall asleep, but they roll 1 red dice for each mind point, and on a 6 they wake up. This is exactly the same as the water spell Sleep. I appreciate lulling things to sleep as a very Bard-like thing to do, but it feels a bit unoriginal. Maybe something more like a pacifying spell with an area of effect would have been more interesting. Affected heroes and monsters would lose the urge to fight. Or maybe even some kind of Pied Piper ability that could lure the monsters out of position. The final spell is Inspiring Tale. It affects one hero, but not the Bard, and that hero gets 1 extra attack dice on their next attack. If a hero in line of sight of the Bard rolls 2 white shields while defending, the Bard regains this spell. This is probably the most interesting spell. Okay, it's just a much weaker version of the fire spell Courage, but you do get to regain the spell under certain circumstances, and that's quite neat. It's also thematic. The Bard is inspired by the other hero's actions, and it gives him a new tale to sing. I get that. But it's still not a particularly exciting spell, and it only affects one character for 1 attack. I really would have liked to see some much more creative ideas for the Bard's abilities, something that would really differentiate him from other spellcasters. As it is, I just don't see why you wouldn't play the Elf if you wanted a combat spellcaster, especially if you have access to the Elf spells from the Mage of the Mirror expansion. So yes, on the one hand, it's great to have another hero option, and I really am glad to see something that was previously exclusive being made available to everybody at retail. I just can't see this Bard singing many songs at my table. My Barbarian would probably chop his head off as soon as he started. Enough moaning though, let's move on. This expansion also includes a fancy new set of combat dice. These are lovely. They are translucent green and probably my favourite set so far. Very clear and easy to read. I think I'm going to give these to my Elf player. Finally, we have a few more game cards. There are 4 equipment cards, a Potion of Battle, Potion of Dexterity, Venom Antidote and Potion of Restoration. And it should be noted, these may or may not be different to versions of the potions you already have. In the Rise of the Dreadmoon expansion, new rules were introduced for alchemy, and all of the potions in the game up to that point were recosted, with some being made craftable and some being revised to make them better or usable by any hero in the game. At the same time, all potions were removed from the equipment deck and put into a new alchemy deck. All 4 of the potions in Spirit Queen's Torment have the same costs and rules as the revised potions from the Rise of the Dreadmoon alchemy deck. However, because each new HeroQuest expansion is created on the assumption that players only have the core set, the potions in Spirit Queen's Torment are equipment cards rather than alchemy cards. Sorry, that may be a bit confusing. I almost confused myself. Basically, if you have Rise of the Dreadmoon, you can ignore these equipment cards and just carry on using your alchemy deck. And as an aside, this will be a bit of an issue for HeroQuest going forwards, as any new potions will end up being classed as equipment cards too. I would like to see Avalon Hill including 2 versions of any new potions, should there ever be any. 1 equipment card and 1 alchemy card. This will allow those players with the alchemy deck to continue using the new rules associated with crafting and searching for random potions, while those that don't use the alchemy rules can still have access to the new potions as part of the equipment deck. But I digress. Finally, there are 6 artifacts, none of which are going to be new to any HeroQuest completionist. There are 3 spell scrolls, Courage, Fire of Wrath and Tempest. I have so many spell scrolls at this point, I don't know what to do with them all. There are also cards for Dust of Disappearance, Rabbit Boots and an Anti-Poison Quill, all artifacts that have surfaced in previous expansions. However, do note that while none of these artifacts work differently from the previous versions, they have all been rewritten and some rules have been clarified, so it is worth swapping out the old versions for these new ones. And that's your lot, except for, of course, the quest book. As I mentioned before, I'm going to dive into the campaign in more detail in a separate video, but for now, I just wanted to go over a few things. Spirit Queen's Torment is a 14-part campaign, so you're getting plenty of gameplay here. And the campaign does make use of several interesting ideas, even if some of them are not to my liking, so we aren't just rehashing old ground. For a start, we have the friendly orcs. There are even orc allies you may find on your quest that will help you along the way. The campaign includes a few puzzles, nothing too tricky, but something that is a bit of a change of pace from murdering evil minions. There are some new types of traps, like monsters that will ambush you. There are new rules for talking with other characters and attempting to locate friends that may not immediately look that friendly. Some missions involve traversing flooded corridors, so the heroes are actually underwater. This concept isn't developed as well as it could be. In one instance it makes very little difference compared to a normal landlocked mission, and in another a pretty interesting idea gets ditched very early on. But there is the beginning of a concept that I think a Zargon player could run with in their own campaigns. Or swim with, I guess. There is also a mission that involves being chased by a horde of enemies that has a fun mechanism to put heroes under pressure. Plus, there are different versions of enemies we are familiar with, which is a great way to add variety to missions without needing new miniatures. I have noticed one potential issue relating to the new ghostly enemies though, as they attack a hero's mind rather than their body. This expansion doesn't include rules for what happens if a hero is reduced to 0 mind points. Other expansions such as Frozen Horror include rules for going into shock, which significantly impairs a hero but does not kill them. However, in Spirit Queen's Torment, no such rule is present. Furthermore, there is one mission where all of the enemies deal mind damage instead of body damage. If being reduced to 0 mind points only puts a hero into shock, as per the other expansions, then there is 0 threat to the heroes in this particular encounter, as they are never taking any physical damage. The worst the enemies can do is slow the heroes down. Overall, I think there is quite a lot of new ideas floating throughout the 14 missions. I'm just not sure any of them are quite as developed as they could be. They feel like good ideas that could have been great if the designer had thought slightly bigger. Still, there is plenty of food for thought here, and I have already been thinking up some new ways to work with flooded tunnels. But I think I've said more than enough for now, so I will summarise. I paid the full recommended retail price of £27.99 for this pack, and I think, for what you are getting in the box, that's pretty reasonable. Even taking into account I'm unlikely to use the Orc hero and I didn't need their new equipment and artifact cards, for my money I still got 15 miniatures in sculpts I didn't previously have, another set of combat dice and a 14-part quest. That's not too bad. I do think you probably get better value out of the bigger expansions like Frozen Horror, but really, the only thing that feels like an oversight here is the lack of any new tokens or map overlays to give the HeroQuest board a new aesthetic and to differentiate these new dungeons from the countless ones we have already tromped through. But overall, I am happy enough with my purchase, and I am more than happy that previously exclusive content is now available to a wider audience. And that will do. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really liked the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I'll see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.